She was only 8 years old, standing barefoot on the marble floor of the city's most exclusive bank, clutching a faded card like it was the last piece of her mother's love. Her clothes were torn, her cheeks smudged with dirt, and her eyes carried the kind of exhaustion that no child should ever know. The millionaire behind the desk looked at her and laughed, a cold, dismissive sound that echoed through the polished halls. He thought she was a joke, a mistake, someone who had wandered into the wrong building. But when he finally slid that worn card into the machine and the screen flickered to life, his laughter died in his throat. The numbers that appeared weren't just shocking. They were impossible. And in that single moment, everything he thought he knew about power, wealth, and worth shattered like glass. If you believe that kindness can transform lives and that every person deserves to be seen, please hit that subscribe button right now. Your support means the world to us and helps us share stories that remind us hope still exists. Stay until the very end. And if this story moves you, drop your thoughts in the comments and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Now, let's begin. Her name was Lily Carter, and she had been surviving on the streets for almost 2 weeks since the shelter ran out of space. The city was massive, overwhelming, filled with people who rushed past her without a second glance, their eyes sliding over her like she was invisible. Lily's mother had died 3 months ago from an illness they couldn't afford to treat, and in her final hours, she had pressed something into Lily's small hands, a white bank card, worn smooth at the edges from years of being carried in a wallet. Her mother's voice had been weak but urgent. She told Lily to keep it safe, to never lose it, that it was important. But she never explained why. Lily had held on to it ever since, carrying it in the pocket of her torn jeans, checking every night to make sure it was still there. She didn't know if it held $10 or 10 cents. She just knew it was the last thing her mother had given her, and that made it precious beyond measure. Today, hunger had driven her to finally use it. The Grand Crest Bank stood like a fortress of glass and steel in the heart of the financial district, a place where fortunes were made and lost with the click of a button. Lily had walked past it dozens of times, always intimidated by its towering presence, by the men and women in expensive suits who swept through its revolving doors with confidence she couldn't imagine possessing. But today, desperation overpowered fear. She pushed through those heavy doors, and the blast of air conditioning hit her like a wave, making her shiver despite the warmth outside. The interior was breathtaking. Chandeliers hung from high ceilings. Marble columns rose like ancient monuments, and everything gleamed with wealth and power. People moved with purpose, their shoes clicking against the polished floor, their voices low and professional. And there, in the center of it all, stood Lily, small and dirty and completely out of place. Heads turned, conversations paused, eyes narrowed with confusion and judgment. She felt every stare like a physical weight pressing down on her shoulders. Lily approached the customer service desk with trembling steps, her heart pounding so hard she thought everyone in the bank could hear it. Behind the counter stood a woman with kind eyes and a name tag that read Sarah Mitchell. Sarah's expression shifted from surprise to concern as she took in Lily's appearance, the torn clothing, the bare feet, the haunted look in her eyes. Lily's voice came out as barely a whisper as she slid the card across the counter, asking if she could please check her balance. Sarah's professional demeanor softened immediately. She didn't see a dirty child. She saw a human being who needed help. But the card in front of her was old, the type linked to accounts that required special access, the kind that couldn't be processed at a standard terminal. Sarah glanced across the floor toward the private banking section, where the bank's most important clients were served. That's where Marcus Stone sat, one of the wealthiest investors in the city, a man whose portfolio was worth billions and whose reputation for ruthlessness was legendary. Sarah hesitated, knowing Marcus didn't deal with ordinary customers, but something in Lily's eyes made her decide to take the risk. Marcus Stone was in the middle of a meeting with his advisors when Sarah approached with Lily trailing behind her. He was laughing at something one of his associates had said, his voice booming with the confidence of a man who had never been told no, who had built an empire on calculated risks and cold precision. He noticed Sarah approaching and raised an eyebrow. then saw the small girl beside her, and his laughter grew louder. He assumed this was some kind of mistake, perhaps a lost child, maybe even a prank. His associates exchanged amused glances, clearly thinking the same thing. Marcus leaned back in his leather chair, a smirk playing on his lips as Sarah explained that the girl needed to check an old account. The absurdity of the situation was almost entertaining to him. Here he was, a billionaire sitting in the most exclusive section of the most powerful bank in the city, being asked to process a balance check for a homeless child. He shook his head, still chuckling, and held out his hand for the card. Lily placed it in his palm, her fingers shaking so badly she almost dropped it. Marcus glanced at it with mild curiosity, then slid it into the terminal, expecting to see nothing, or perhaps a few dollars at most. What happened next would change everything. The screen flickered for a moment, processing the ancient card's information, and then the numbers appeared. Marcus's smile vanished instantly. His eyes widened, then narrowed, then widened again as if he couldn't trust what he was seeing. He leaned forward, his face inches from the monitor, reading and rereading the digits displayed in stark black and white. His breathing changed, became shallow and controlled. One of his advisors noticed his reaction and stepped closer, peering over his shoulder. The advisor's jaw dropped. Sarah, still standing beside Lily, watched Marcus's transformation with growing confusion. The man who had been laughing seconds ago now looked like he had been struck by lightning. The entire private banking section had gone silent. Other employees sensed something significant was happening and began drifting closer, drawn by the sudden tension in the air. Marcus finally spoke, his voice hoarse and disbelieving, asking Sarah to run the card again. She did. The same numbers appeared. The balance wasn't wrong. It wasn't a glitch. It was real. Lily stood frozen, her small frame trembling, completely unaware of the earthquake she had just caused. She didn't understand the looks on their faces or the whispered conversations happening around her. She only knew that something had shifted, that the man who had laughed at her now looked at her with something that resembled fear, or maybe respect, or was something else entirely. Sarah crouched down beside Lily, her voice gentle and careful, asking if she knew what was on the card. Lily shook her head, her eyes filling with tears, admitting she thought it might have a little money, enough for food maybe. Sarah's heart broke and soared at the same time. She explained as simply as she could that Lily's mother had left her something extraordinary, something that would change her life forever. The account held millions, not thousands, not hundreds of thousands, millions. Lily's legs gave out, and Sarah caught her before she collapsed, holding the little girl as reality crashed over her in waves. Marcus had risen from his chair, his usual arrogance completely absent. He moved slowly toward Lily, his expression unreadable, and for the first time in his career, he felt small. This child, this forgotten, overlooked, discarded child, possessed wealth that rivaled some of his most powerful clients. He had judged her instantly, dismissed her without thought, and now stood corrected in the most profound way possible. He asked Sarah to pull up the account details, and as she navigated through the system, a story began to emerge. Lily's mother, before she became ill, had worked as a caregiver for an elderly man named Thomas Reed, a reclusive philanthropist who had made his fortune in technology decades ago. Thomas had no living family, no children, no one to inherit his wealth. Lily's mother had cared for him in his final years with a kindness and dedication that moved him deeply. He had watched Lily grow up through photos and stories, and in secret, he had established a trust fund in her name, investing it carefully, ensuring it would grow year after year, waiting for the day she would discover it. The trust had been designed to activate only when Lily was in genuine need, triggered by specific criteria that ensured she wouldn't learn about it too soon or too late. Today, when she walked into the bank with nothing, desperate and alone, the system had recognized her circumstances and unlocked everything. Thomas Reed had gambled that love and care mattered more than blood, and he had bet his entire fortune on a child he barely knew, but whose mother had shown him humanity in his loneliest hours. Marcus read through the documents, his hands shaking slightly, realizing the magnitude of what he was witnessing. This wasn't just money. This was a legacy built on kindness, a fortune born from compassion, and it had been waiting patiently for Lily to claim it. He looked at the little girl, still crying in Sarah's arms, and felt something crack open inside his chest, something that had been closed for a very long time. He made a decision in that moment, one that surprised even himself. He would help her, not for profit, not for recognition, but because he finally understood that wealth without humanity was worthless. Marcus instructed his team to immediately secure Lily's interests, to contact the best family attorneys in the city, to ensure she was placed with a guardian who would protect both her and her inheritance. He personally called the city's top social services director, pulling strings he rarely used for anyone but himself. He arranged for Lily to be taken to a safe, comfortable place while the legal processes were put in motion. He ordered food to be brought to her, fresh clothes, medical care, anything she needed. And through it all, Lily watched him with wide, confused eyes, unable to fully comprehend how her world had changed so dramatically in a single hour. The other bankers and clients in the building whispered among themselves, spreading the story like wildfire. The homeless girl with millions. The billionaire who had laughed and then fallen silent. The card that held a miracle. By the time the sun began to set outside the tall windows, Lily was no longer invisible. She was seen, valued, and protected. And Marcus Stone, the man who had built his empire on numbers and cold calculations, had learned that sometimes the most valuable things in life couldn't be measured on a screen. As evening light filtered through the bank's windows, casting golden patterns across the marble floor, Lily sat in Marcus's private office, wrapped in a soft blanket someone had found for her. She held a cup of hot chocolate in her small hands, steam rising in delicate spirals, and for the first time in months, she felt warm. Marcus sat across from her, no longer the intimidating figure from earlier, but someone who looked almost gentle, almost uncertain. He explained to her, in words she could understand, that her mother had known someone very special, someone who wanted to make sure Lily would always be taken care of. He told her that she had enough money to live comfortably for the rest of her life, to go to the best schools, to have a home, to never be hungry or cold again. Lily listened, tears streaming down her cheeks, clutching the worn card that had changed everything. She whispered that she just wanted her mother back, that all the money in the world couldn't replace the person she had lost. Marcus had no answer for that. Some wounds couldn't be healed with wealth. But he promised her that he would make sure her mother's sacrifice and Thomas Reed's generosity wouldn't be wasted. Within days, the legal machinery began to turn. Marcus hired the best attorneys, who worked tirelessly to ensure Lily's inheritance was protected from anyone who might try to exploit her. Social services found her a foster family, carefully vetted people who had experience with children who had suffered trauma, people who understood that Lily needed love more than anything else. Marcus personally met with them, making it clear that he would be watching, that Lily's well-being was now something he cared about deeply. It surprised everyone who knew him, this sudden transformation from cold businessman to protective guardian figure. But those who witnessed what had happened in the bank that day understood. Sometimes a single moment can crack open even the hardest heart. Marcus began visiting Lily regularly, bringing books, toys, and most importantly, his time. He listened to her stories about her mother, about the things they used to do together, about the dreams they had shared. And slowly, Lily began to heal, not because of the money, but because she finally had people who cared. The story of what happened at Grand Crest Bank spread throughout the city, covered by news outlets, shared on social media, debated in coffee shops and boardrooms. Some called it a miracle. Others called it justice. Many simply called it beautiful. Lily's story became a symbol of hope in a world that often felt hopeless. Proof that sometimes the forgotten are remembered, that sometimes kindness echoes across time, that sometimes love leaves behind gifts that transcend death itself. Thomas Reed's name, once known only in certain circles, became celebrated as the philanthropist who had bet everything on compassion. Lily's mother, who had lived and died in obscurity, was honored posthumously for the love she had given both to her daughter and to a lonely old man. And Marcus Stone, the billionaire who had laughed, became known as the man who learned to see. His reputation changed. People noticed he was different now, more thoughtful, more generous, more human. He started funding programs for homeless children, establishing scholarships in Thomas Reed's name, and using his influence to advocate for those who had no voice. Months passed, and Lily settled into her new life. She started school, made friends, and slowly learned to smile again. Her foster family loved her deeply, giving her the stability and affection she desperately needed. Marcus remained a constant presence, becoming something like an uncle figure, someone she could trust and rely on. On the anniversary of the day, she walked into the bank. Marcus took Lily back to Grand Crest, not to conduct business, but to remember. They stood together in the lobby, looking at the spot where everything had changed. Sarah, the kind employee who had first helped Lily, joined them, and together they reflected on how a single act of courage, a desperate child asking for help, had rippled outward and touched so many lives. Lily looked up at Marcus and thanked him, not for the money, but for seeing her when everyone else looked away. Marcus knelt down to her level and told her the truth. She had taught him far more than he had taught her. She had reminded him that humanity mattered more than wealth, that compassion was more valuable than power, and that sometimes the smallest people carry the biggest lessons. As they walked out of the bank together into the bright afternoon sunshine, Lily felt something she hadn't felt in a very long time: peace. Her mother was gone, and that pain would never fully disappear. But she wasn't alone anymore. She had people who loved her, a future filled with possibility, and the knowledge that somewhere, somehow, her mother had made sure she would be okay. The card she had clutched so desperately that day was now framed and hanging in her bedroom, a reminder of where she had been and how far she had come. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like, comment, and subscribe to Prime Stories. Share this with someone who needs to remember that miracles still happen and that every person has infinite worth. Your support helps us continue bringing stories of hope to a world that desperately needs them. Before you go, comment, "I believe in the power of kindness." Lily's story wasn't just about money. It was about being seen, being valued, and being reminded that even in our darkest moments, love finds a way to reach us. And sometimes, all it takes is the courage to ask for help and someone willing to truly listen.